Welcome everyone to our third day of Phenology Week. We're so glad that you're joining us for our Wednesday presentation. We'll get to that in just a moment, but before we do that, I just wanted to highlight some other things coming up this week. So we have on our Phenology Week landing page, you can see some recordings of some of the sessions we've already had this week, but I wanted to point out that we still have two more webinars coming up. Tomorrow we have a mobile app session. I know a lot of you are very eagerly waiting our new mobile app, so we're going to have an update about that. And then Friday, we have a really exciting researcher Q&A with three researchers that we've never heard from before here at the NPN. They're going to be talking to us about their use of Nature's Notebook data. So I hope that you will join us for that. I also wanted to share, and you might have seen this if you are getting our Phenology Week emails, that we just announced today our Pheno Champion. So the Pheno Champion Award is awarded to a local phenology program that's done exceptional work in the prior year. And so we awarded the Pheno Champion Award for 2025 to the Bloomingdale Trail Phenology Program, which is located in Chicago. And we'll put the link in the chat so you can learn more about them as well. But they did some amazing work with great data quality, really consistent data collection on a number of species, including service berries and lilacs there. And they also did a lot of amazing outreach work and recruited new observers. So we're really excited that they've won the award for last year. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our director, Teresa Crimmins, who's going to introduce our keynote speaker for this evening.
Thanks, Erin. And thanks to all of you for being here. This is really cool. And if I haven't had the chance to meet you yet, I look forward to meeting you. I really appreciate that you're here and enthusiastic about the topic of phenology. So it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Mark Hineline as our keynote speaker for Phenology Week this week. I'll read you Mark's bio, but I'm going to have to embellish just a little bit too. Mark was trained as an interdisciplinary scholar in history, philosophy, and sociology of science. His bio says he has taught at the University of California, San Diego, but I know he's taught at a lot of other institutions too. And he's the author of a really fabulous book that if you haven't seen yet, I totally encourage you to go chase down and read. It's called Ground Truth, A Guide to Tracking Climate Change at Home. And I first met Mark, or it was introduced to Mark and his work when I was invited to review first the proposal for that book and then also the book itself. And I was so excited because prior to that, there was really only one other book that seemed like it was accessible to non-scientists that talked about phenology, and that is Richard Premack's book, Walden Warming, which is very focused on his work, which is looking at Thoreau and his discovery of Thoreau's record and how things have changed since Thoreau's time there in the Boston area. But Mark does a really fabulous job of talking about phenology at a much broader scale and kind of traces some of the history of phenology monitoring in this country. And it makes this really wonderful invitation to readers to participate in the act of tracking phenology too. So as soon as I read it, I was an instant fan and I continue to be. And I'm really excited to make this connection to you all as well, because I think we all share a like mind and enthusiasm for the topic. So with that, I am happy to turn the floor over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to thank Erin for doing the technical work of setting this up, and of course to Teresa for, I could go on and on for about the things I'm grateful to Teresa for, like reviewing my book for my publisher is Chicago University Press. She didn't mention that I also reviewed her book for MIT, the book on phenology, and I was very happy to see that MIT permitted her to title it Phenology. University of Chicago Press would not let me use the word phenology in the title of my book. So, but I also want to thank all of you for being here. It's so exciting to talk to you all. I am going to point out you probably will not be able to find my book in a bookstore, and there are technical business reasons, distribution reasons for that, but you can absolutely get it on Amazon, where it's just sitting there, right there, waiting to be clicked. So oftentimes when I get a phone call from a friend or I make a call to a friend and start and Aaron, I just did this exact thing. Uh, we start with how are you? And everybody exchanges, I'm good, I'm good. And then if for any reason conversation begins to go off in a different direction, I say, wait, ask me where I am. Uh, and it's the right question, has been the right question for years and years and years, but is especially right now when I'm living as a digital nomad. So I've been living in my van across the United States for 2 years. But even before that, uh, the geographical question has always been apt to me, and it fascinates me that people. I think it's the normal the normal attitude when you talk to somebody on the phone, that they're either at home or maybe they're shopping in the grocery store when you catch them. But you don't think about where they are and what they're experiencing at the moment that you happen to start talking to them. So well, I'm going to talk about where I am. I'm at Mather Campground at the on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. I'm here because the weather is more ideal for van life than where I was, which was in Orange County, California, and where I had hoped to be, which was Jumbo Rocks in Joshua Tree National Park. I came up here in order to get through the heat wave, and it's even going to be hot here, but it isn't going to be as hot as some other places. Let me describe where I am. It's a campground. There is asphalt that leads the cars to pads where you park. The asphalt is paved on top of a soil that is based on the Permian limestone that is at this layer of the Colorado Plateau that the canyon carves through. And Mather Campground it's a marvelous place because it's at the intersection of two biomes. One of them is juniper and pinyon pine, and you can see plenty of that in the background. Some of the juniper has berries right now, and I had taken a photograph of the berries, but decided not to screen share because it's not within my package of competences to screen share. But there are berries, and then the other biome is ponderosa pine, and of course, this area of Arizona is the largest ponderosa pine forest in the world. And so these two come together like a Venn diagram at Mather Campground. And it supports local wildlife. The wildlife is unnaturally affected by the amount of traffic that goes through here, right? It's not a natural place in the sense that maybe 20 miles in either direction is more natural. But nevertheless, you get. I just had an elk, a calf elk, older, just passed through my campground, and they actually act like the grounds crew, right? They go around and with their weed whackers and so forth, and clean things up. I caught three of their saw three of them a couple of days ago. This one was a loner. As for birds, I was talking to Erin about crows and ravens. They're both here. The crows were making noise at the moment that I talked to her. I don't know which raven is around here. I've also seen within the last hour um, an American robin. Boy, the words just went out. A chickadee. And what's the one that is upside down? Can anybody turn on their microphone?
A
And
nuthatch?
yes, a nuthatch. Thank you. There was a nuthatch here. So That's generally where I am. The air is about 80, 81 degrees. There's a light breeze, and it's all very tranquil at the moment. Very, very, very nice place. So I'm gonna I'm gonna work through some lists in order to get at this thing that my title suggests, living a life in season or a life in season. And so I'll go through the lists. What are they? Uh, Seasons, of course. And this is not a stable category necessarily. It would be better if it were better understood as such. Seasons are something that we take for granted. Um, we learned very, very early that winter is different from summer, spring is different from fall. All of them are things that you can look forward to year after year. But in fact, there are places that have more seasons. There are places that have fewer. And my favorite example of this, of thinking about seasons as not a fixed category, comes straight out of Thoreau. And this is not necessarily well known. It might be part of the Ken Burns special that's coming up in 2 weeks about Henry David Thoreau, which, if you don't know that it's coming, and you should pay attention. Um, Thoreau made notes in his journal and then sat down and tried to analyze them in order to figure out how seasons worked in Concord, Massachusetts. And what he concluded was that there were not four seasons, but five. So there was the regular spring, summer, fall, winter, but he decided that November was a special season all to itself. And in some ways, I've experienced that. I lived in Maine for a few years, and it makes a certain amount of sense to me that there would be those five seasons. I have a favorite season, and it's actually a favorite moment in a favorite season. And let me give you a sense of what I mean when I say this. People say that California hasn't got seasons. People move there and they say, "Oh, I miss the seasons." Well, you're not paying attention because there are seasons in California. And some of them come and they only last a weekend. And my favorite season in California is when there's a cold Santa Ana wind in December. And what happens is that wind, and it only happens this one time, maybe a weekend, maybe early in a week, knocks all of the dried palm fronds onto the streets, right? So the equivalent of leaves, but it all happens very, very quickly. And there's this psychological consequence of the cold wind that everybody is a little bit nervous but happy. It's very exciting. Uh, my favorite, it actually is a season, but it's a particular moment in a season, and it happens in New England and only in New England. Northern New England is ideal, but Massachusetts works. The Adirondacks in which is not New England, but rather the Northeast, sometimes works. And it's when all of the leaves have changed. So you're not looking forward to that anymore, and already some of them have dropped. But of those that are still there, they're in the trees, and then you get a night with a kind of misty fog. It comes along about 5 or 6 o'clock. By now it's dark. We're not talking about being out in the wilderness, but rather in, some small New England town. So there's lots of light. And the mist is thick enough that it makes little dewdrops on the leaves that are still hanging there, which refract the lights of people's porches. And I call that absolute autumn. Um, that's the moment that I just absolutely love. And if it were possible, I would follow that around the world so that I was always living in or close to absolute autumn. Now, of course, I would have to go to the southern hemisphere and do a lot of, and it's not possible. Let me be clear about that. So so my idea of what it would mean to live in season has to be a little bit more humdrum than spending all of my life in absolute autumn. Um, I think that C.S. Lewis, for instance, might have written a book about little children who are transported to absolute autumn, and and it's always like that. And I hope that they don't take it for granted and become bored by it. But among my lists, there are the seasons, and we'll talk a little bit more about them uh, in a little while. The next, which helps to shape my attitude toward the seasons as I transport myself through them, are a set of core values. I didn't learn about these. I didn't find out what these were for myself until I was teaching a course where it came up as something that I should do with the students. And so what I asked them to do was to sit down with a list of probably 100 values, things like justice and fairness and so forth, and and discover for themselves the five values that are really at the core of their lives, the things that they pursue that give their lives meaning. And of course, every student had a different list. My list surprised me because it didn't list justice. What it did, well, I'll tell you what they are: um, beauty, creativity, hard work, peace of mind, and mobility. And let me say a little bit about each. Um, I'm living in my core value right here. Is there any place on the face of the earth as beautiful as the Grand Canyon? Uh, and I wish I could show it to you. I took a photograph right at sunset, where there was this combination of shadows and bright limestone and so forth. Creativity. Well, I just talked about getting that shot, and that's one way that I express that. Hard work. This is a I know that you're from all over North America, at the very least, and so you may not appreciate what I'm about to say, but it's really a New England value. Um, working hard just to appreciate what it is you have, and so, for instance, um, I don't appreciate a table that I've bought from a store as much as I appreciate a table that I've built myself. And that's true throughout my life. Okay, the last two are really complicated because they're almost impossible to get at the same time. Mobility and peace of mind. If you're mobile, you don't have peace of mind. If you have peace of mind, you're probably not mobile. And I do work hard at having both of those. I'm definitely fulfilling mobility to a degree that I haven't at any other time in my life, although I've been relatively mobile. As for peace of mind, there are moments like this. Uh, what you have to do is to live in the moment in order to get the kind of peace of mind you want when you're mobile. And so those core values manifest themselves in what psychologists and others call the self. And where does the self come from? Well, um, David Brooks, the one-time columnist for the New York Times, he's left within the last 2 weeks to go off and do other things. One said, where does the self come from? For him, it came what he read, right? Little bits and pieces of things that he read from the time that he started reading. Gave him a sense that, yes, that's who I am. I would rather be that than something else. And so I have a long list of people that I've read or whose work I've experienced that actually formed my sense of self. And these are important for this idea of living in season, because how is it that the self gets to situate itself in a seasonal context? So who are they? Well, I have to tell you at the outset that they're all men, um, and they're all white men, and so I think that if I were born again, if I could grow up, be born maybe in 2000, I would read other people, because there would be other people that were available to me and would be assigned in junior high school and high school and so on and so forth. But these are the people that I read. So number one is Richard Byrd. Let me say a little bit about Richard Byrd. Um, Byrd was an adventurer he was a rear admiral in the Navy. And somehow or other, he talked the Navy and a lot of other people into sponsoring uh, ex- expeditions to Antarctica at a time when Antarctica was virtually unknown. You'd had Shackleton go to Antarctica, Amundsen go to Antarctica, and the third one, the guy who died, whose name is not coming to me, but nevertheless, he was British and tried to make the South Pole. Did make the South Pole. Didn't make it all the way back to his base camp. Um, so that was a sort of first wave of Antarctic exploration. Richard Byrd was a second wave, and what he brought down, among other things, was airplanes. So he flew the first airplane over the South Pole. But he's important for this story because of something that he did in his second expedition to South to Antarctica, where he had taken a little hut that was built in Norway of Norwegian wood, of all things, uh, on the ship down there, and he was going to take it by sled and have people dig a hole in the ground, put the shed in it, cover it up with snow, and then have two or three people spend all winter inside of the shed in order to record the weather. What were the temperatures? How much aurora australis was there? Um, and he decided to man it himself, and he did so. Um, it was sort of a disaster. He had a problem with carbon monoxide and nearly died, and they had to come down in the middle of the Antarctic winter with no light whatsoever and rescue him after he had told them not to do that. But they weren't going to let him die. They brought him back to Little America, and he wrote a book about it called with the title Alone. There's no subtitle. It's just Alone. He tells the story of this winter where he tried to get the weather. Um, let's hope that there's no phenologist who goes through this experience in order to get the first phenological observations of some place. But my father brought that home to me when I was 8 years old. He said, "Here, read this." Now, I have absolutely no idea why. It was probably the first book without pictures that I ever read in my life, but it had this tremendous effect on me, um, which involved number one, seasons. Right? This was an attempt to learn something about a season that nobody had ever experienced before. Number two, being alone, um, and no, let's just leave it at that. So this actually began a long, long period of time when I only read books about adventurers who were alone, and and that had a big effect on me. Number two, is Max Perkins, which is a name that may not mean anything to anybody. He was an editor at Scribner's in New York, and among his authors were F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, and Thomas Wolfe. Right, and so his boys are the people who I read, but I always read them with an understanding that they came to me through the editorial work of Max Perkins. Right, they weren't They weren't raw in the sense that you might think an author is raw. I'm going to set that aside. Next one is Frank Lloyd Wright. Um, Now, Frank Lloyd Wright is important for seasons because of Taliesin in Wisconsin and Taliesin West in Scottsdale. Uh, in his career had four movements. The first one were a bunch of famous houses around Chicago and Buffalo and so on and so forth, the prairie houses. The second movement was he was almost ignored by the architectural community, but designed houses both for Los Angeles and for Tokyo. And after that, came back and created an architecture school, um, again at his house in the two Taliesin's. And what would happen is that the students would migrate back and forth. The first migration would be in Thanksgiving, and they would pack up everything that they had in Wisconsin and drive across the United States, stopping at every Frank Lloyd Wright house in order to see it, and end up in Scottsdale and spend the entire winter in Scottsdale. Around Easter, they would pack it up and then um, go back to Wisconsin. And I probably learned about this when I was 16 years old, and it seemed to me a really smart way to live. And I began looking around for ways to do that. Um, Two more people. One of them is E.B. White. Uh, I think that I think that everybody alive now, or very close to everybody alive, is first introduced to E.B. White through Charlotte's Web. Maybe also Stuart Little, probably not The Trumpet of the Swan, which is a phenological book. Uh, they're all phenological books in their particular way, but he was a very famous children's author, um, and I certainly read Charlotte's Web when I was young. But for me, his importance was that he wrote a set of letters that were published in 1977, very early in 1977. And I read that. I'm a native of Maine. Turned out he lived on a farm in Maine. So Charlotte's Web was a book about his own experience in that particular place. And the more I read his letters, the more I thought, this is what I want to be. This is the person I would like to be. And eventually, what happened was that on the first date I ever had with my wife, we're separated now, but first date that I had with my wife, we were in a restaurant in Salem, Massachusetts, and we had talked so long that the waiters were putting the chairs on the tables. And I hope everybody is lucky enough to have a date like that with somebody. Okay, well, we weren't done talking. What do you want to do? And I said, well, let's go and knock on E.B. White's door. Now, today in 2026, that sounds like stalking. But the word stalking didn't exist in 1978. It was a different time, and I was actually motivated by a wonderful movie, very, very dated movie. So if you go out and watch this, you'll say, "Well, this is really strange." But it was a movie called Picasso Summer, and it starred Albert Finney and Yvette Mimieux, who lived in San Francisco and were sort of bored with life. What do you want to do? I don't know. And Albert Finney says, "I'm going to meet Picasso." So they get on a plane and they fly to France, and they start asking questions about how he might be able to meet Picasso. Lots of subplots to this entire thing, but it had an effect on me, and I thought, I'd like to meet E.B. White. So in the dead of winter in Maine, we drove up on this first date that I had. Stayed in the Blue Hill Inn overnight because we had to time it just right, and knocked on his door. And he let us in. we had a conversation for about an hour, and it was absolutely marvelous. And I decided, okay, yes, this is the life that I want. I was living in Maine within a month, um, on a farm that looked a lot like his that I rented, and trying to do what he did, which was to be a yeoman farmer, an independent yeoman farmer, or a gentleman farmer, as he often put it. I wasn't very successful at that, but I was attentive to seasons because that's what he talks about in all of his books is the seasonal challenges that he faces and deals with, and the joys that come from living in season. But if I wasn't successful at that, what I was successful at was editing for 2 or 3 years the Maine Organic Farmer and Gardener, from which I got a lot of intellectual ideas about agriculture and living in season. And if any of you have been to Maine or are living in Maine now, you may be aware of something called the Common Ground Country Fair, which has a different art poster every year. I started those art posters back in 1981. So finally, Henry David Thoreau, who again is going to be the subject of a Ken Burns documentary in a couple of weeks. I hardly know where to begin talking about Thoreau. I mean, he is the consummate phenologist, someone who absolutely dedicated his life to doing as much observational work as he could and packing it into to his journal. I've always wanted to write a kind of fictional biography of him as though he didn't die when he did, which was in 1862, but rather have him live through the end of the Civil War and have a couple of his friends in the science school at Harvard recruit him to do ecology. And this novel would talk about how ecology would have developed quite differently from the way that it did if it had been Thoreau instead of the people who actually developed uh, ecology. So these are the influences that sort of shape the way that I live in season. And there are several different ways that these people lived in season. You can stay in one place, which is absolutely the norm. Um, Stay in one place, live in a house or an apartment, have a really good life, but step out every once in a while and pay attention to the seasonal consequences of the physical and biological world that impacts you. Um, and I have certainly done that. Uh, and of course, almost everyone that I know does that or has done that to a large extent. The NPN and the various organizations like that are absolutely dependent upon people who live that like that, because it would be impossible to do a good job of dating phenological phenomena if you were in a different place every time something happened. And as is the case with the berries and the juniper, I have absolutely no idea when they showed up. I just know that they're. Now, I was when we were talking about my doing this keynote, uh, when Teresa and I were talking about this, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful for me to take my van and follow spring to the best of my ability, from wherever I started? And I imagined myself starting in Anza-Borrego Desert, which is a part of the Sonoran Desert in California, but then making my way all the way across the country to Maine. In fact, to Quoddy Head, Maine, which is the far eastern point in Maine. Right across a strait of water is Campobello Island, which is Canada. Um, it sounds marvelous to me. Uh, and I'm not going to do it. And the reason that I'm not going to do it is there's a war right now and gas prices have gone up and who knows what else is going to happen. So not this year. Next year, I'm going to do a better job of this. People have asked me, well, how are you going to do this? Because, you're never going to know when the first things bud. How do you get to that? And in fact, spring is a bracket. And so following the spring means following the bracket and making notations and video and so forth of the most interesting parts of that bracket. But again, all the way to Maine, if you've lived in Maine, you know that there is still snow and ice on the north sides of rocks in June, like the second week in June. So that was my timeline. Next year, what I hope to do is to start in Key West and make my way to Quoddy Head. And that'll make more sense, and hopefully gas prices will have stabilized by then. Right, okay. So you can stay in one place, or you can travel around for seasons. And I just mentioned one way of doing this, which is to figure out a way to be in one season for as many months as you possibly can, which is entirely possible. And you can imagine, I think, maybe starting in a place like I don't know, Panama, and driving up the Trans American Highway to Alaska. I don't actually know whether that's possible. I haven't looked into it. But the other way is simply and this is the way that I have been doing it, is simply being in moderate weather most of the time and paying attention to what is in season at the particular time that you're there. And I have found this to be very satisfying, rather comfortable. I spend winter in Southern California. The most challenging part of this whole thing is summer, because with climate change, summers get hotter and hotter and hotter. And then the question is, where do you go in order to beat that? I don't have an air conditioned house. I don't have an air conditioned apartment. The air conditioning in my van only works when I'm driving it, and I don't want to be driving it all the time. So what I learned the first year that I was out is that a lot of the time, if you're right on the coast, particularly in Pacific Northwest, you can find fairly comfortable temperatures. Of course, it's very moist. I was really shocked at the degree to which it feels like it's raining when it's not raining. The sky is blue. But the other way of staying cool in the summertime is rather complicated because and that's the mountains. And I haven't learned how to do this quite yet. If you're in the mountains and enjoying cooler weather, certainly what really matters is overnights. It's not the daytime temperatures that matter. It's the overnight temperatures that matter for having a comfortable life. There's another species of mammal that really loves the same weather and in the same place. So to be cool in the mountains means having to live with bears, and to take regard of what's going on. I was in Oregon, north of Crater Lake, the first year that I was out, so nearly 2 years ago, and there were fires at the time. The fires drove the bears into places that they didn't know. So if bears are in a place that they don't know, then they have to explore it. And that means looking in your car and everybody else's car and dumping over the trash cans and so forth. That was pretty exciting. And then last year I was in a campground where a bear had actually gone into a fifth wheel RV in the next campsite, and the townspeople, that's the way that I think of them now. All of the other campers who were aware of this came and rushed and surrounded the RV with their phones because they wanted to get a picture of the bear coming out the window screaming. It was like a Frankenstein movie. It was very strange. Uh, but but yes, you know, living in season and trying to stay cool in the summertime uh, is uh, is a matter of dealing with bears, certainly in the West. Um, so what's the take home? The take home is there are many ways to live. Most people simply live more or less the way that their parents did and their grandparents did, making some changes based upon things that they're interested in, the education that they have, their particular means and experiences and abilities, uh, but don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to sense of place, right? And I have found that most people find me unusual in that I put sense of place. If I were to take those five core values and say, okay, if I had to boil that down to one thing, what is it? And the one thing is sense of place. And there are again varying ways of dealing with that. I think one of the most interesting and wonderful ways of dealing with a set of values that that orbit sense of place was the idea of bioregionalism, which came out of Gary Snyder and a bunch of other um, environmentalists, mostly in the 1980s and the 1990s. And what they said was, you need to live in a particular place and know that place and develop your politics around that place. So it isn't just being neighborly, it's trying to figure out, what kind of a community is this and how should we shape it? And the way that it should be shaped is on carrying capacity, right? And so where does our water come from? How do our seasons work? And so forth are part of bioregionalism. I was very interested in this movement all through the 1990s, and then it disappeared. And I wondered where it disappeared. I don't have a good answer for that yet, but I think that it was September 11th, 2001, that suddenly made the notion of bioregionalism seem way too provincial and way too local in a world that was just impactfully global. But it may be a good time now to start going back and thinking about that again, thinking about what it is, what it would be like to live, to really pay attention to where you live and live in one place. The other way to do this is the way that I'm doing it, and I'm not alone. There are tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people in the United States who do this. I don't know that they necessarily do it with as by paying as much attention to where they are in terms of seasons and things like phenological seasonal change, as I try to do, and I'm not always successful, but I try to be. Um, and so that would be my takeaway, is that what I'm talking about, living in season, is of course things that modern humans, hominids, did exclusively over 10,000 years ago. And then we all got really, really smart and said, okay, let's all stay in one place, grow plants and animals and give them to the king and hope he gives us some of it back. And that's what we've been doing for 11,000 years. in one form or another. Is that the best way to live? It has its advantages, uh, but it has lots of disadvantages. And so the takeaway from everything that I've said is if you're interested in drilling a little deeper into what it means to be a human being and doing that for yourself, how should I live? It's a good idea to take all of these things into account, and phenology is a really important thing. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Arthur, we would love to take time. We have some time for questions. If there are any questions, you're getting lots of claps. I'm not sure you can see it.
Oh, good. Yes.
Arthur, if you have questions, you can either put them in the Q&A or I welcome folks to just unmute themselves and ask directly too. You had a lot of intriguing comments there. One thing I was just pondering, which I haven't thought much about, but that is an interesting question that you posed about when did we lose that sense of bioregionalism, or when did we pivot from maybe having a more embodied sense of place to, I don't know, collective identity with our nation or something like that. And 9/11 definitely seems like potentially a very important event. And it's impossible to separate it too from also the onset of the recognition of the climate changing. And then, with that comes the cascading sense of hopelessness or fear or, just like lack of positive feelings. And then technology, right around that same time is when it was the onset of the internet and then devices and all these things that distract us constantly from not only place, but even community. And yeah, I feel like all those things are where it feels
Even
like we're ready for a pendulum swing back.
even the Amish, right, have not been able to isolate themselves from social media. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but I think 9/11, the reason that I think that is primarily 9/11 is that bioregionalism was a kind of it was a niche idea uh, that was developed by privileged people. And what was the privilege? The privilege was a sense of isolation, a sense of nothing could touch them. And then lo and behold, people fly airplanes into buildings.
Yeah, it's a wake-up call, among other things. You've inspired folks to read E.B. White books with phonology in mind. I love that.
Yeah, that's great. The book to read is One Man's Meat. And he didn't write that for the New Yorker, which was very unusual for him. He wrote it for, I think it was Atlantic Monthly, but I'm not positive. But it was a series of diary length essays from his home in Brooklyn, Maine.
So, like talking about his source of his food and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Really,
well, the source of his food was his farm.
yeah.
So, he talked about what it was to be a farmer um, and so forth.
So Alan shares that it was a real adventure listening to you, and it got him excited about traveling to find his space,
Great.
which is very cool.
Yeah.
So yes, you're right that we did chat about you tracking spring across country, and we did also kind of like lose track of that plan. But I think it could be something really cool for next spring if you're planning it a little more intentionally. And if it's something that we kind of communicate about a little bit more in advance, that's certainly something that we could track with you and kind of, I don't know, share your journey on social media if you're interested or
Well, I
something,
think it would have
kind
to
of
be
feed it.
interactive because I would need data in order to plan the next place that I went to.
Right, right, right. Well, we've got
Yeah, I know you
that.
do.
Both with the the spring index, our map that kind of indicates where areas are receiving or experiencing the conditions associated with the start of biological activity. And it's the phenology, as people are reporting it, is a really good integrator of recent weather. It unfortunately doesn't give you any sense of whether you're going to hit a sudden winter storm,
That's right.
which
Yeah,
is always the dicey bit, but we can certainly tell you, looking backwards in time, or looking at our data, what has happened recently and how things are unfurling.
and that'll be great. Somebody named Georgia wondered who her authors would be, and other people's authors that helped form the self that they inhabit. Um,
Did I miss that? Was that a question or a comment? I'm sorry.
she says that she can't find her speak button.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay. Uh, Aaron, are you able to unmute Georgia?
And no, I have to comment on Edward Abbey. I have
Of course.
somebody just asked about Edward Abbey. He's not. He was at exactly the same time as a writer named Colin Fletcher, who spent 2 months crossing the Grand Canyon. And I preferred Fletcher to Abbey, but then later on, I just thought Abbey was marvelous. I spent some time in the Tucson in the research library at the University of Arizona, reading through Abbey's papers, and it's like my favorite thing is a letter from Robert Redford to Edward Abbey, talking about, oh, it's too bad I couldn't pick up the rights for the Monkey Wrench Gang.
That's pretty classic. That's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
So Eli, I see you've got your hand raised. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Uh, I would like to make a brief comment. I have been uh, kind of following seasons too. In the Chinese calendar, they have 24 they call solar terms, and I find it extremely beautiful because each season is divided into 6 parts. And the description they make has been so matching the weather we have had here in Dallas, the cold, the wind, the rain, the awakening of the insects. And so I was thinking that in phenology, instead of looking just at one large season, spring, summer, and so forth, we see all those 6 uh, mini seasons, and I can send maybe to Erin an email where all these seasons are listed, and any of you can do the search in Google, and so you inspire me now to kind of continue observing more in the seasons, but the 24 solar terms. And the Chinese expression, we say solar terms, but they say the season energy, the chi of each one of those two
No,
weeks periods. Thank you.
I think somebody two different people said there are 72 such divisions in Japan.
Yeah.
It's it's certainly the case you have to stay in one place in order to experience, either 24 or 72 distinct seasonal, I don't know what you would call them. They're episodes or categories, or what have you. It, traveling would not be good for that, because you would drive through and miss something.
You probably crossed 16 of them in one day.
Yeah, that's
Well, we're
absolutely.
through.
Um, no, I'm not gonna say any more. That was interesting, Eli. I didn't even know that there were 24.
Well, the
Yeah.
seasons in China, they are based on the China's weather, mainly in the northern part. So the way I see this is to take it as an inspiration and then pay attention on the way the season in itself changes from the first week of spring to the last week of spring, and weather and everything is completely different.
Yeah.
So if you look at the way these seasons are described, like when does rain start, when do insects come up from hibernation, when does a leaf start to sprout the fruit, and so it happens at certain times of spring. And it is a way, I believe, in phenology, when you pay attention to those things, and based on that, in the previous presentation, there were these graphs of the variation of times when the tree started to grow, to bloom, and to grow, to sprout the leaves. And so we can kind of develop our own mini seasons or sub-seasons depending on the place we live in the US or the world.
Right. And so,
And,
so
and
the thing that would distinguish seasons from just moments is that they would repeat and they would repeat in the same order. So that's the thing that you have to look for, and that means a commitment of years, not, you know, a few. Now, somebody mentioned La Chapelle, um, and I wanted to say that I am writing another book about the beginning of the modern environmental movement, where I have a chapter that talks about three women. And for some reason, if I'm in a situation like this, I cannot pull up their names. Annie Dillard, La Chapelle, and the science fiction writer whose name is
Ursula Le Guin.
Ursula Le Guin. Yep. Yeah. So those three women, and not only those, they're just the ones that I picked, were very, very important for spreading the idea of environmentalism after 1968. So I just wanted to mention. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Love this. And we're coming up with all sorts of great authors. We are going to have to start like a NPN reading club, book club. I wanted to give, I lost it now, Angie O'Neill the floor briefly. Are you able to unmute and tell us about your book, your memoir?
Thank you. Um, I loved all those changes seasonally on this northern Indiana lake. So I had this aha moment when you were talking that I had no idea I was experiencing my own phenology notebook all these years in observing when the mayflies would come out, when the how the lightning bugs come out in July, and all the seasonal changes, the freezing and thawing, the spring peepers. The legend has it that it takes three times before the chorus frogs are finally every night, and then that's officially spring. And just fun facts like that I put in this little memoir book, and lots of pictures, and it was just a great way to grow up. Just a great way.
Yeah.
That's so cool. That's so very cool. Thanks for sharing. Oh, and here's another one. Marianne, do you want to share your recommendations? Marianne Reuter suggests The Hidden Seasons, a calendar of nature's clues by Tristan Booley, which talks about the micro seasons hidden within each day. And this is new to
Uh-oh.
me. So it was even more granular.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I do want to point out, while we're talking about this, there's a research that I am never going to get around to, and I sure wish that I could. If any of you are a researcher or know a researcher and you want to put something in their head, here it is. Many advanced societies, certainly since the Babylonians, so go back about 5,000 years, have ended up in failure. And so the question is why? Why did they end up in failure? And my theory is that the people growing all of the crops were phenologists.
Mhm.
Right? They knew when to plant and they knew when to reap. Um, but the elites that sort of grow out of this pastoral and agricultural culture and build cities and pyramids and so on and so forth don't trust the peasants in the fields. Who do they trust? They trust astronomers. And so astronomers say spring starts on the solstice, right? Or on the equinox, and it ends in the solstice, and so on and so forth. So everybody should go out and start planting on March 21st, no matter what the weather and the phenology of the particular area is. And it probably led to failures.
Certainly, certainly. I definitely want to shout out, Gianna pointed out that Robin Wall Kimmerer also should be named here, and absolutely she's
Yes.
written
Yeah.
some beautiful, beautiful accounts of seasonal events and how rooted they are in long, long history and sense of place for sure. We have, I don't know if you're all aware, we just very recently launched a forum on our website. And we have a thread on there. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, and one of the errands chime in if I am. But there, I think that it's open to anyone, and there is a thread on here. I think it's nested under ways to engage your group, but I know there was a thread on book clubs, because that's one of the ways for our local phenology programs, which are groups of folks that track plants and animals at the same site over long periods of time. A lot of times when winter is long and dark and cold and there's not much observing to be done, groups have come up with really creative ways to keep folks engaged, and book clubs are a really great way. And there was a thread on here talking about books, specific book recommendations. And so I'd love to get these ideas captured on there and keep the conversation going on there. Okay, well, I want to be mindful of time. So are there any last questions? If not, I did put a link at the very beginning of Mark's presentation for his book on Amazon. Hopefully that worked for you, but I definitely encourage you to check it out because it is a really just lovely. I heard echoes of that appearing in some of the things that you spoke about today, and I just really appreciated you sharing your thoughts and how much you've thought about phenology and sense of place and how it has shaped your work and how your work has shaped how you think about phenology. And I hope this is the beginning of many conversations.
Indeed. Yeah. Thank you so much for everyone for being here, and especially for paying close attention to the idea about books, because they excite me a lot.
Yeah, and no, this has been really nice. It's a
Thank you.
it's
Bye.
a different angle on what we usually cover in these presentations, which is
Yeah.
usually rather scientific and in tone and flavor. And so I really appreciate it. And yeah, I hope this is something that we can continue.
Great.
All right. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you the rest of the week for the remainder of Phenology Week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mark. Have a great rest of your travels. Let's be in touch.
Okay, will do.
Bye-bye.